Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our podcast series covering the constantly shifting dynamics of integrated marketing and communications in responsible investment. I am your co-host, Max Hilton, US Managing Director at Peregrine Communications. And as ever, I'm joined by my colleague and co-host, Josh Cole, Peregrine's Global Head of Analytics. So as a continuation of our goal to present to you the leading voices of marketing communications and asset management, with, as ever, the sole aim of discussing the most pressing challenges, trends, and opportunities in the space, it's my pleasure to be sharing the screen with Bethany Morris, co-head of global content marketing, ETF indexing and smart beta at Amundi, and Johan Hillebrand, executive director and global head of content and digital solutions at Robeco. So do say a quick hello, both.
Hi. Max.
Great. And again, an absolute pleasure having you on today. So Bethany has extensive communications and marketing experience at firms such as Robeco, Northern Trust, and BlackRock, having joined Amundi in 2020. In her current role, Bethany has been leading the charge and raising the awareness of ESG related ETF products, an area incidentally we at Peregrine identified as ample white space for opportunity in our 2020 ESG report. Can't wait to get a little more granular on that. And then of course, Johan, who is an experienced content and branding professional working at major firms such as ABN AMRO in the Netherlands, and of course is a key member of the Robeco marketing team that has consistently delivered the firm as a leading voice, again, as evidenced by it being the #1 outperformer in our proprietary 2020 Global 100 report. And of course, Robeco is a top name in the responsible investments space. So both, given we have a fair amount to cover in today's conversation, I'll fire away with the inaugural question. So let's just start at a macro level with you, Bethany. So what do you think are the big trends within responsible investment marketing? And what will those be for the year ahead and beyond, for that matter?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, there's certainly white space in the ETF area when it comes to ESG and marketing. So I think there's going to be a growing indexing storyline within ESG. I think in the past, there's been quite a focus on the active world and a kind of view that that's the only way to implement ESG. And I think that will be shifting even more so this year. And I think really the kind of perspective of making the story more authentic. So things such as engagement and corporate practice rather than just looking at fund solutions will probably be a big focus for us.
And Johan?
Yeah, I would say sustainable investing in itself probably is one of the main topics for the coming year. Within that, we tend to focus and we have a lot of conversations with clients on decarbonization and climate. That is really a hot topic right now, drilling into that, finding proper solutions there. We as a company have pledged together with 27 peers to become net zero carbon emission by 2050, which is a huge development as well. Finally, I would say the launch of SFDR within the EU is a big development as well. And so introducing a common framework, common taxonomy, a clear categorization of funds is an important step, and it will really help the industry move forward. And maybe finally, and here I echo what our ESG specialists are always saying, this year really about moving from ambition to creating real world impact. And I think that is really an exciting step.
Yeah, I know there's some really pertinent points made there, and as you both alluded to, it does come down to how do you make it authentic, right? Certainly, something we think a lot about in terms of authenticity is finding a topic that you can really own. But not only that, also a topic which is, comparatively underserved in terms of a white space, again, as you insinuated, Bethany. Okay, that's great.
I think to that point, Max, I think one of the questions I had for the guys was, it's all very well sort of spotting those areas of white space. But I think the sort of follow-on question is how do we create category or authority around that? Now, obviously, with the sort of extensive content experience that both Bethany and Johan have, it'd be great to sort of talk a little bit about where you see the opportunities for creating category authority. Perhaps if I can go to you, Johan, first on that one.
Yeah. As a company, we really want to stand out on what we call selective areas, such as sustainable investing, such as factor investing. If you want to achieve that, I can think of 3 areas where you really have to perform. And so the one thing I would say, it all starts with thought leadership, doing your research right. And so really, I think it comes down to doing that consistently, but having some proper in-depth research, take that as the basis for what I would say is step 2 is implementation power. Being able to provide the right solutions to your clients. And then thirdly is communication and marketing skills. And so if you would be a thought leader, if you would have the solutions, but if you don't have the communication and marketing skills, probably no one would know. So you're not a leader then either. And when I refer to communication skills, it also has to do with being vocal on the category and being willing and able to contribute to the discussion. And sometimes, and we don't do it for the sake of being provocative, but sometimes it might even be a bit provocative, but really trying to contribute to the discussion and bringing the category as a whole further. And I think it takes all 3 of them to build up real authority. So it's also not easy. It will take time. And should not be easy either, but that's how I look at it.
And Johan, sorry, Bethany, if I may, Robeco has obviously been a staunch advocate for a more robust data-driven approach as well, which is perhaps something we should discuss in due course, particularly around standardization and the like.
Yeah, true. And as I said, it's about consistency. It's about we've started in this area for decades ago already, and I think we touch upon company culture a bit later on as well. But there's really a strong culture to really try and understand what's going on and what really drives the market in this area. And that's probably the basis on where we come from and how we build on all these years of experience and looked into the data and used that.
I think, Bethany, from your perspective as well, obviously you've done a lot of work in the last 12 months or so, particularly around trying to create category or authority for Amundi around some quite interesting perspectives from the passive side of things as well. So it'd be great to get your take on category authority question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a passive or ETF perspective, there is the challenge that anybody can track an ESG index. We're all ETF providers. We all track indices. So everybody's claiming that they are leaders in ESG and have all the funds. But just being able to track an ESG index isn't really what defines you as a leader in that space. So I think when it comes to sustainability, you really have to have a bit more of an introspective kind of look and a bit of navel gazing almost at what makes you special. And certainly from coming from Robeco into Amundi, one of the things that was important to me was making sure that the ESG credibility was real as well before I made that move. And in joining, what we noticed, and it was then proven in sort of public reporting as well, was the aspect of engagement in voting that really does lend a credibility. And when you're looking at ESG investing from a passive perspective, that's where you can actually have a real difference in terms of impact. So if you, as an investor, want to have an impact in the climate space, or want to have a social impact, but you're investing in a manager that votes against climate or social resolutions, is that really delivering on what your objectives are? Or do you need to be invested with a manager that votes positively in those situations and is engaging in a positive aspect? So that's where we really try to kind of hone our story into that. And it's not easy to replicate. You can't just say that you do it. If you don't do it, you have to be invested in that, and it has to be part of the organization.
100%. And I think that's, it comes back to this thing that we sort of keep touching on, which is this issue of authenticity.
Yeah.
And I think that's that leads me quite nicely to the next question I wanted to get to, which is actually around the flip side of trying to talk on some of these issues, which is obviously the pitfalls of trying to join the conversation around responsible investment. And obviously, in the back of all of our minds when we're working on these sorts of campaigns or projects is the danger of greenwashing and that sort of thing. So I'd love to get your perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if the story's hollow and doesn't really stand up to peeling back all of the layers, then it will soon fall flat as soon as an investor goes past the marketing story. If they can see that, I use all the cliches, if they can see that you're not walking the talk as well, then they will not be interested once they get past that. So I think it's really important to make sure that the thing that you choose to hang your hat on in that space is something that your organization can really does well, believes in, and can be consistent in how you're telling that story. I think I can use a Robeco example from my time working with Johan. When we implemented a partnership, one of the key things that was focused on water, or plastic really, and in choosing that partnership, it was really important to go back to the engagement team and make sure that it was consistent with their values and what they were looking to engage on. To go to the investment teams, make sure that actually we had a product that was aligned with this, that we were managing assets in a way that made sense. And also even to talk to people like the facilities and the wider organisation to make sure we had the right recycling programs in place, that we didn't have plastic bottles in meeting rooms and all those kind of things. Before we told the story, we needed to make sure that we were living the story as well. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're going to do this and really tell an ESG story, you have to make sure you can back it up through everything that you do.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. It's almost more of it's almost more like a lifestyle change for the brand than it is, a sort of marketing veneer. If it's going to be done authentically, it's
absolutely,
really, as you say. I mean, Johan, what's your take on how to avoid that?
And I think it totally makes sense what Bethany just mentioned. So the one thing I could add is that we should not underestimate our audience as well. And so I think in especially last half year, if you look at all the advertisements that has been out there, most of them were on ESG or ESG related topic.
So then you could swap the logos and not know who was who.
Yeah, probably you could. And you should really think about it if you're the 50th asset manager putting out an ad there on a topic related to ESG, and you do not really live the story, what the value of that is, because the audiences will know, as we just discussed, it's about research, it's about implementation power, it's the example of Bethany I really liked. So if that's not the sort of thing that you can live up to, then you should really wonder if you want to put your marketing campaign out there on these topics.
Mm-hmm. It does feel like, I mean, obviously there was a lot of challenges last year, but I do think one of the really great things about last year was that it kind of really drew a line under the fact that it felt like something changed in the conversation around responsible investment for a number of reasons. But I think it'd be great to get your take on what you think's changed, if you think anything's changed, and if so, what that sort of means for us as marketers as well. Perhaps Johan, if you could sort of pick that up.
Yeah, I recall a story from the Economist, and they said 2020 is the year that everything changed. And hopefully, if we think about sustainability and if we think of ourselves a couple of years ahead and we look back at 2020, that really has proven to be the case. And now, sort of in hindsight, that seems very obvious. That if you look at the flows, I just read an article where I think it said that ESG flows were up 100% over the last year, even in the US, up with 67, 68%, something like that. So these are pretty impressive figures. But if we recall, let's say April, May, when we are in the midst of the first lockdown, at least in the Netherlands, and then with many people losing their jobs, with all the issues we had within the economy, back then we could also have thought of scenarios where sustainability would not have come to the fore that much. But luckily it did, and it really shows that people came to the conclusion that this is really for real and we have to act now. And we see that also in our industry, and I think that is that really is a good thing.
It really does, because it feels like there was this really interesting sort of virtuous circle between, the underlying performance of some of these products, and also, I think some of the heightened cultural awareness as well, and actually, that feeding into the sort of decision making of investors as well, and in the way that they wanted to think about where they were putting their money and what impact that was going to have. I think that was such a big theme last year as well, that I think it was a really interesting year from this perspective. Bethany, and I know this is something that's close to your heart as well. So good to get your take.
Absolutely. I think certainly from the conversations with our sales teams, there's not a single client meeting wherever we are in the world that doesn't involve ESG as a key topic. So last year really was pretty remarkable in terms of flows. I think from an ETF perspective, there were 50% of the total flows into ETFs in Europe last year were ESG, over 50%. So, and we saw that even more strongly within our organisation, because we have that's quite a strength for us. But I would say even at the peak of the crisis, as Johan mentioned, in that kind of real initial lockdown phase where people were coming out of equities, where they were reinvesting, they were using that opportunity to move into ESG, in part because the ESG indices performed pretty strongly last year. In many cases, certainly on the MSCI indices that we were using, the ESG indices performed more strongly than the vanilla indices. So it almost became the new normal to some extent.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and so really tallies with everything that we've been hearing as well, and also what Johan was saying.
Yeah, and on the note of tallying with everything that we've been hearing, I mean, obviously, company culture is increasingly a critical issue for asset management. It's been in the context of all things culture, it's really been, a seminal moment. I mean, how do each of you think about these issues for your respective brands? Johan, let's start with you there.
Yeah, I think culture is critical. And if you want or not, you have one. So every company has its particular culture. And I think it is really important also as a marketeer to understand what sort of the drivers are of the strengths of your company, or it could be weaknesses as well. But to understand that properly and to build on that, I think is really important. If I think of Robeco, I really like to think of us as being a very research-driven company, and not to say that there are asset management companies that are not research-driven, but it's sort of so close to our nature to really try and understand, sort of finding the truth. I don't know if that's ever possible. It's what people really try to do, really understand the nitty-gritty of every topic that we touch upon and build from there, do our research from there, and then build solutions that really work with these research findings. And that is a very strong driver within the company. And our marketing is really built on that as well. So we have a very content-driven marketing approach. I think in everything we do, is it events, is it almost everything we do is sort of content-driven. It's at the core of, let's say, the company, but also of everything we do within marketing. So their culture really fits in pretty well with what we do. I sort of sometimes like to think of, I saw an interview with the guys from the Swedish pop band ABBA. And they were questioned on why they, why they thought they were so successful. And what they said was, the fact that they were in Sweden and not back then in, what was it, Liverpool or London or so, where pop culture was really all around. But that made them make also their own decisions. So they were influenced by this pop culture, but they also brought in some Swedish elements into that, which according to them created sort of a unique sound, and that made them stand out and was the basis of their success, what they said. I like to think of Robeco sometimes in a similar way, where our headquarters is based in Rotterdam, where we now are a truly global company. But the fact that we are from the early days are so research driven, and people were convinced already really early on sustainable investing, on factor investing, and we built our experience from Rotterdam. Gave us a sort of unique twist to it. That's at least how we like to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, look, certainly for us, culture is an increasingly critical component of an effective brand, indeed, irrespective of your business vertical. Bethany, what's your view?
Yeah, I was kind of intrigued about this because I still haven't been to the office, really. I joined in the middle of in June last year, so
right.
I basically moved to a different desk in my house to move jobs. So I was interested on how that, I would feel the culture and how that would pass down as well. And I think it's quite interesting to experience it remotely. And so some of the point that Johan was making kind of rings true as well. Being a French asset manager also lends a certain uniqueness to the culture. I think it's quite different. And, the French are very much about people and society and action in that sense. And I think that passes down as part of Amundi, obviously as part of Crédit Agricole, where there is a kind of motto that we work every day in the interests of clients and society. I thought, who doesn't? But actually, then that kind of adds a real human-centric focus to the organisation. And then when Amundi was formed, there were 4 founding principles. One of them was about responsibility and responsible investing, and that was all focused on climate and people and society. And you feel that even when you've not been to the office and not met anybody in person, you can kind of feel that there's a desire to work for the good of clients and for the good of people, but also a real humanness to the interactions within the organisation and their response to everybody teleworking, and as we would say in French. So I think if you, as Johan said, everybody has a culture, and if it's a good one, you feel it, or if it's a bad one, you feel it too. But if it's a good one, it's a positive transmission, and I think then that feeds into the interactions clients have with us and how they see the message transmitted in those meetings, the interactions they have in those meetings, and how the firm is projected across everything. And I think that ties back to what you guys were saying at the beginning about the credibility of the story. And if you're telling an ESG story that's about positive social impact, but then as a company you don't back that up in the way you treat your own staff, you're not engaging with staff in the right way, you don't look at diversity, you don't look at holiday entitlement and flexibility and all of those things, then it just doesn't ring true. So the culture is critical, I think, to making all of this work.
Yeah, and look, I think to your point, authenticity is obviously a key tenet of culture, but it is somewhat of a binary outcome, and of course, everyone is purporting to have the next best thing culture-wise, but to really corroborate that, that purpose is key. So I think that's very well articulated. I mean, look, more candidly speaking, we believe that this is a real, wake up moment where managers start to ask the more, profound question, i.e., do we have a point beyond merely accumulating assets?
Mm-hmm.
And if they can't think about what that is, perhaps, they deserve to be acquired by someone, who can. So I think it's going to be an intriguing year as it relates to that, for sure.
I think you touched on something really interesting there, Bethany, around the importance of articulating or finding a way of articulating that humanness of the company culture. And I think that sort of touched on something really interesting I did want to bring up just before we sort of round up this conversation, which is around, one of the things we saw from a lot of the data we've looked at in the last year or so is basically sort of decimation of sort of online and digital engagement. I think we typically tend to see most firms slightly increasing their social media engagement year on year. And then last year, I think mainly because of the sort of proliferation of content and the sort of Zoom fatigue, COVID content fatigue, we saw that really fall off a cliff. I think off the top of my head, it was around, 2020 LinkedIn average engagement was about a quarter of what it was in 2019, which is a staggering statistic. Now, obviously, there were firms which continued to do great on that score. But as we sort of move into 2021, I sort of wanted to lastly just ask you about how we can be a bit more creative and how we can bring that humanness to our digital communications as well, which is obviously going to be continue to be such a big part of the mix.
No, I can definitely relate to the Zoom fatigue, and it's lovely to speak to you guys today, but I think we've all done more Zoom and seen more insides of people's houses than anybody wanted to this year. Well, not this year, but over the last year. And I think it kind of got to a point, obviously there was a big spike and lots of people doing lots of things, and it kind of got to the point where there was so much that you didn't know what to engage with and how to kind of fit it all in, so you just didn't engage with anything. And I think people need to feel like they're special. I don't know, there's a tendency with digital content and these webinars and things that you just send it out to everybody and try and get the most people to come along, and they just sit there, they listen, they're obviously going to take it all in and buy whatever you tell them to buy, and there you go, your job's done. But you lack that kind of feeling special, being interactive, and having a face that you would have in a real event when you meet in person. So I think it's trying to find ways of making people feel like they are special, like you want to talk to them as we go forward. So when we look at last year, some of the things we did to try and do that were making things into like a breakfast webinar and positioning it as a breakfast and sending people a breakfast to have with us whilst they join the webinar. So they received a hamper of muffins and coffee and tea so they could join us and we would all have breakfast together, or making it part of a wine tasting where there's a presentation and then we have a guided wine tasting afterwards, so they feel more intimate and more special as events. I guess the one advantage of digital is now that asset managers are getting better at being able to deliver it, being able to be more timely and accessible and respond to things quicker than you could do in a real life event also gives you an edge, I think. When everybody was shifting last year, maybe it took a while to get up to speed, but I think now we're all in a position that we can be more responsive and go out in a really timely fashion. So that's another opportunity, I would say.
I think that's a fab point, especially around the sort of crash course that everyone had in learning to
up
the agility of communications. I think it'd be great to hear from you on that as well, Johan, because I know you've got some views around.
Yeah. So yeah, there's many angles to this, and so it's not really easy to give a very straightforward answer. But I would say it all starts with understanding what clients are looking for, and so really dive into client needs. Tap into all the sources you can in order to get a good understanding of what the topics are that are really of high interest. And if you produce content in whatever form that informs client about these topics, then yeah, obviously, and that is you will get better results than if you start thinking inside out and start thinking about the products that you would like to sell initially. If I think about content marketing and the results we've seen, I think it's also a matter of providing good quality and good frequency, and these two jointly. And good quality, there's also many angles to that. So if you think about, and that's more in society as a whole, but if you think about Gen Z and how they look at companies and really looking for them to stand up way more and be very vocal on views on societal issues, on climate, on inequality and stuff like that. That's something that still probably within the industry is not that easy, but I think people look at us and we earlier on in the discussion also already said, are you willing to contribute to the discussions around that? And I think that's what people expect from us as well. And then if you think about quality combined with good frequency, I think that really helps, because people then know they bump into things that you produce, but if they know that they might expect good quality, that sort of makes that you will have good viewer or readership figures. Now, so that's things that I would like to add to that.
So a data-driven marketing campaign focused on quality outcomes versus generic output.
I think so, yeah, because data can help you understanding what people are looking for. And so Absolutely. It's not the data in itself, but is what can you get from it and what do you see happening? And mostly it's pretty obvious. So mostly people are looking for what will happen in the marketplace, or they are interested in the solutions that you have, but not maybe initially yourself. So first think about client needs and touch upon that, and from that you can work further on.
Yeah, and there are certain nuances around the psychographics as well, right? So the values, the behaviors, I mean, you can really start to analyze and, evaluate the data around that, which obviously informs particularly content.
Yeah, that's true as well.
Johan, I certainly couldn't agree more with your point around the importance of quality over quantity. I think, last year, as you both pointed out, we saw a lot of people quickly pivoting digitally as much and as quickly as they could. In some cases, still quite slowly. But I think 2021 is going to be, very much about working out new ways of getting creative, new ways of trying to cut through. And I think that's going to be, from a marketing standpoint, such a huge theme for this year. I'm conscious that we've taken up quite a lot of your Friday afternoon already, and there's probably one or two things that you very busy people would like to sort of get squared away before the weekend. But I'd just like to sort of thank you both for coming on. I think, as we look ahead to what 2021 has in store for asset managers, I think there's no shortage of uncertainty. But I think if there's one thing that we can be pretty confident about, is that responsible investment is going to continue to be a major theme. And it's our view that both Amundi and Robeco, in your different ways, are very much among the sort of strongest brands in the ESG and responsible investment space. Also worth mentioning that you both, if I recall correctly, ranked in the top 10 in ShareAction's 2020 Voting Matters report as well. So that's a nice vindication of that authenticity point, which we've sort of kept hammering home. So it's wonderful to have had the privilege to have you both on, both of you, Johan and Bethany, to talk about these issues. I think it's been a really useful, additive conversation. Hopefully, people have found it useful and hopefully actionable as well. So for those of you listening, I hope you've enjoyed these recent conversations and this one today especially. Do hit the subscribe link to stay abreast of our upcoming podcasts, and see you next time. Thank you, Johan and Bethany.
Thanks for
Thank you
having us.
both.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.